What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Now, I almost felt compelled to make this video. I see a lot of comments and a lot of back and forth banter regarding the subject, so I figured I'd shed some light, give my 2 cents on the matter, and that's amateur boxing versus professional boxing. And if you listen real close, I should cover my stance on it, so you should be able to get a good idea of what I feel about it. Some of you guys have selective hearing, and you'll attempt to use things I say. I don't know if you don't listen to the whole video or you listen to parts and pause it and hurry up and write a comment, but you don't listen to the video in its entirety and then you try to make points. And I'm like, it's clear you haven't listened to the whole video, or you're not listening to the whole message. You're just taking parts of it. So if you listen, if you care to listen, listen, and I'll give you my stance on amateur versus professional boxing. Now, historically, traditionally, fighters that have an amateur background tend to be more successful in the professional rankings. You got people like Oscar De La Hoya, Floyd Mayweather. They were amateur standouts. They had a good amateur background, and they went on to do good things in the sport of boxing. I agree with that. However, when it comes to someone arguing that because of a fighter and his amateur experience, that's going to automatically translate into a successful professional career, I don't agree with that. And here's why. In the amateurs, it is a different ball game. It's almost like apple and oranges. You can't necessarily compare the two. In the amateurs, they use headgear. In the professionals, they don't. So it's kind of like comparing someone's training camp and their sparring session to how they're actually going to perform on fight night with that opponent, no headgear. It doesn't really translate. You can have the best training camp, the best sparring partners. Oh, I sparred a middleweight and I'm a welterweight in training camp with headgear. But ultimately, that doesn't mean you're going to fight somebody in your own division and knock them out because you sparred a middleweight with headgear. I mean, it's not translatable, in my opinion. Another thing is when you look at sparring or just the amateurs, things like that, sparring partners, a lot of them become friends. Ray Beltran and Manny Pacquiao have worked together for years, so they're not trying to knock each other's head off. They're not trying to kill each other. They're trying to prepare each other for whatever fights. So that's one thing you have to consider. In the amateurs, it's kind of the same way. A lot of these guys fighting the amateurs, they're younger and they're still developing their style. And I'm not saying they're not trying to win, but again, it's a different ball game. So I liken it to sparring versus fight night. Aside from that, the rounds, difference in rounds, usually on the fights that would be debated where people are bringing up amateur experience, those fights are 8, 10, or 12 rounds professionally. In the amateurs, they're going to be 3 or 4 rounds. And if it's a 4-round fight, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's only 2 minutes long as opposed to 3-minute rounds in boxing. So you have to have a different level of conditioning to fight with no headgear and to last longer than 4 rounds. That's why they call them the championship rounds in boxing. You see plenty of fighters who look good throughout, and then they seem gassed like round 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. They don't look like the same fighter as in the opening rounds. So you have to condition your body to a different degree. Another thing with the amateurs, in the amateurs, if you make it to the ring, you do your ring entrance, make it to the ring, and you're waiting and you're prepared to fight, and your opponent is not, your opponent just does a no-show, then that's called a walkover. And by default, they basically forfeit and you automatically win. So that goes on your record as a win just because your opponent didn't show up. Now, please tell me, when's the last time you've seen a professional bout? And I see a lot of stuff like Nonito's afraid of Rigondeaux, or Floyd Mayweather's ducking, or Pacquiao's a catchweight, whatever the situation is. But name the last time you've seen a professional bout where one fighter made it to the ring, did his ring entrance, rapped out on the way to the ring, listened to rap music or whatever, mariachi, whatever music they came out to, they made it to the ring, and their opponent did not show up. The opponent just didn't come. And believe it or not, that happens more often than you think in the amateurs. It does happen. That's why they have a term for it. It's called walkover. Look it up. So that's something else you have to consider, that when there's no money involved, things change. In the amateurs, it's like, okay, for whatever reason, some people don't come out, they don't show up, they can't make it, whatever. Maybe they don't even take it as serious. Who knows? And that's another thing I have to talk about, money. Anytime you add money to any equation, usually the stakes are higher. So if there's a monetary gain, then you have to understand that people will usually do more when there's money involved. Um, just to know that, hey, I'm fighting Floyd Mayweather Jr. If I knock him out or if I beat him, that's going to do wonders for my career. That's going to possibly give me a spot in the history books and a whole new world, a whole different lifestyle to raise my kids and secure some money for years to come just from beating Floyd Mayweather. But again, in the amateurs, it doesn't. There's not that same type of incentive. If you beat, if Gennady Golovkin beat Andre Dirrell, which he did in the amateurs, it's just something else to add to his list. The other thing you have to understand is in the amateurs, it's based on a scoring system. So you can, in essence, throw love taps or punches that are effective shots and legal shots and win a round just because you outworked your opponent and it's scored completely different. Keep in mind in the amateurs, if you knock someone down, you do not get a point for that. There's no point. So Ruslan Provodnikov versus Timothy Bradley in the 12th round, where Bradley took a knee, that wouldn't get pointed. You wouldn't get a point for that. Obviously, in the professional, if you knock someone down, then you get a point for that, and most judges will consider that, and it'll reflect on their scorecards. So overall, it's just a different ball game, and I'm not saying amateur experience doesn't hurt. Any experience in any situation helps, but I don't think they go hand in hand, so to speak, in terms of it's a guarantee, I guess you could say. Look at it like, I don't know how many other sports you guys watch, or if you're just boxing, but if you know anything about football, look at college football versus NFL football. You have people who stand out in college, like Tim Tebow, whatever. Then he makes it to the NFL, which is the next step, and he is nowhere near getting the type of recognition or accolades that he got in college in the NFL. And I think most sports are like that. The other thing I have to cover is in the amateurs, you have to look at time frames. Time frame means everything. And here's a quick story to maybe put it in perspective for some of you. When I was in the 6th grade, there was a kid at my school in middle school. His name was Philip, and he was huge. He was buff, he was a wrestler, and he was bigger than all the other kids at that point. He ended up transferring, like maybe 8th grade or something. He transferred to a different school. So I lost touch with him. I hadn't seen him, but I remember him. He was huge. He was big. He was way bigger than all the other kids. Some time elapsed, and I was probably about a sophomore in high school. And after school, a bunch of people were talking, and it grouped up in a circle, and I seen it, and it was him. It was the kid Philip who had just came to our school to visit. And at this time, I'm 6'2", so I was a lot bigger. Like, a lot had changed from 6th, 7th, 8th grade to sophomore year. Went through a growth spurt and all that. I'm looking at this dude Philip, and he looks like a midget. He looks really small. He looked small, short, the whole nine. And that's what happens with time. Sometimes their bodies develop, people catch up. I'm talking about this dude was huge in 6th grade, and then after years, I end up catching up to him and obviously getting way bigger. I mean, I had to outweigh him at that point, probably like 40 to 60 pounds maybe. And that's what happens. Sometimes these fighters fight in the amateurs, and that's not necessarily an indication of where they're at with their career. I mean, most people, if you're dedicated to something and you stick to it, there's a level of growth with it. If you're really adamant. And certain things you can't teach, like speed, chin, power. So some people naturally have that or don't have it, but you can get better and you can grow. You can fight different styles and learn more and more to it. And again, sometimes people have notable wins over people, but it's at a time where they just were the better person. But that's not necessarily an indication of what would happen currently. If you look at Amir Khan versus Kell Brook, Amir Khan says he beat Kell Brook in the amateurs. Kell Brook is a big welterweight now, a division higher than Amir Khan, and he hits hard. So will Amir Khan be able to beat him now? No headgear? I don't know. You look at Roberto Marroquin. He fought Gary Russell Jr. and Adrian Broner in the amateurs, and he beat both of them. I believe Matakin fights at 122 and Gary Russell Jr. fights at 126, so a division higher than him. And he has crazy speed and power, it looks like, for Gary Russell Jr. Then you look at Adrian Broner, who's fighting at a 135, about to move up to welterweight, 147, and he's been running through some people. So is that an indication that Matakin will be able to beat Broner and Gary Russell Jr. again? Not really, because it's a different ball game. I mean, he definitely had a good account of himself and had Rigondeaux hurt at a couple times, but that's not a guarantee that he will be able to duplicate that same success against a Gary Russell Jr. or Adrian Broner currently, even though he beat both of them in the amateurs. So as far as I'm concerned, amateurs is definitely helpful, but it's not like, oh, this is 2 + 2 = 4 in my book. It's not simple arithmetic that states if you were a great amateur standout, you're going to be successful. To my knowledge, I think Roy Jones Jr. didn't have the greatest amateur background. And if you know boxing, you'll know that he dominated the sport from the late 80s to the early 2000s. So again, it's not an indication. You also have people like Sergio Martinez, who was playing soccer and he was maybe 21, 22, and then he picked up boxing. He had to learn on the job, and now he's recognized as one of the pound for pound greats that currently fight in most respectable top 5 lists. So there's exceptions to every rule. I don't think it automatically translates. So people like Gennady Golovkin, Rigondeaux, they definitely show a skill set. Like Gennady Golovkin, he shows power. Rigondeaux shows excellent poise, excellent defense. But in my opinion, they still have to prove more in the amateurs. And I can't say this for Gennady Golovkin, but as far as Rigondeaux, we're going to really see what he's made of because he's fighting Nonito, who is recognized as pound for pound top 10 on most lists. So that will be his test. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think amateur backgrounds help, but it's not a guarantee. And that's basically my stance on the amateurs. Usually you'll do better if you have an amateur background, but you also have people like Chavez Sr., who didn't have an amateur background but fought over 100 people and learned on the job and was still successful and is still recognized as a legend in the sport. So I don't think it's a good argument for the people who choose to argue that, hey, this is what's going to happen if these two square up currently based on the amateurs. I mean, that's like me saying, man, when I was 19, I had all this money. I had a Bentley. I had this. And then currently I don't have that. So it's all about the current, basically, for me. What you look like now, what your skill set is against current elite level fighters or your recent competition. The amateurs is more or less a distant memory that helped you get to this level. So that's my stance on it. Let me know what you guys think. How important is amateurs background? Is it not important? Do you think it's a good point to argue if they have a successful amateur career? Let me know something. Till next video, it's Ego signing off.